Hey everybody, this is Jared here again for CX Disruptors. I'm here with Nicolas de Kouchkovsky, who is the fractional CMO of CaCube Consulting. Nicholas,
How are you today?
I'm in a great mood. We were just talking a little bit about history before, but now we have to move on to customer experience, right?
Well, we could stay in history. I think it's a passion of both of us.
Uh, Unfortunately, I'm not sure if our target audience would agree. So let me jump right into the first question here with a tiny bit of history. Um, so how do you perceive the shift in enterprise strategy in 2024 as compared to last year to 2023? And what do you think is driving this change? Because I think now we're seeing a lot more change between years than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, indeed. And if you look actually not just 2023, but the last 3 years, the trends were frankly pretty much the same. Embrace CX discipline, transition to the cloud, enable digital first omni-channel experiences, and leverage AI and automation. So, but when you look at these, they haven't changed, and they were moving the industry like a big boat, steadily but slowly. Now, I don't think those trends are going away, but there's a big change looming is customer service operations will be asked to evaluate the strategic impact of AI, not incrementally like we've been doing in the past couple of years.
No,
So
that
if
doesn't
you
work
want to,
anymore.
yeah, and if you want to unpack it, just look at this year. I mean, we're about to celebrate, or maybe we've celebrated, I don't quote me on the date, the 1 year anniversary of ChatGPT. And since
Yeah, we're there. We
innovation,
just passed it.
and since then, the pace hasn't changed. And everybody has been digesting the changes, starting to learn what it can do, the risks. And when you look at what we've done in the contact center space, we implemented summarization and a few things, but nothing really big. And I think as we move into the next year, which is typically a good time to take a step back, organization will be asked, okay, what's the impact of AI, and think more uh, strategically. So what will be the balance between human service and self-service? How many people are needed? A few months ago, Gartner came with pretty bold prediction that in 2026, there will be a 20 to 30% decline in the numbers of agents. I mean, all those potential changes are basically what is being what needs to be considered by all the organizations. And the other thing is, all those AI changes are really underpinned with data. So, what's really the strategy around data? So, that's the big change I see coming is look at AI with all its ramification much more strategically.
Yeah, I think with the Gartner prediction, it's always there's a lot of truth to it, but there's just so many companies that are going to be behind. It's usually, maybe a quarter that have moved that far. But one quick question I had is you gave an example of call summarization. Now, that is not the sexiest, most, innovative use of AI, like on the surface, and yet it makes a massive impact. Do you think that people are more aware of we'll say non-exciting but more impactful AI uses? So I think
I think the
everybody they
reason,
imagine something flashy, something huge, something like ChatGPT, some magical sci-fi assistant.
so customer service is not an industry prone to take risks, and you deal with things that you need to do at scale. So things that look simple individually at the scale of a contact center or customer service that becomes much more challenging. So call summarization is a low-hanging fruit, which gave many organizations the opportunity to start seeing the power with absolutely no risks. So I think this is what drove the uptake with this feature. It happens that it has a two impact. Well, what's interesting is you mentioned the first is I'm going to shave cost out of after call work. I think we should look as well at the quality of data. Let's face it, in many cases, people are punching whatever code as a disposition, as the mood of the day, or what may look good or bad in their results. Now you have facts, you have data, and the insights that we're going to be able to leverage are much more strategic. But to your question, I think it was the safest experiment to make.
It kind of brings us to skipping around to other questions. So you've talked about cost cutting, which a lot of people love to think of first, or automation, reducing overall costs. But you mentioned data now twice, and I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit more about that? How should there seems to be a lot of potential there. And so,
Yeah.
how do you think that companies should maybe modify the way, modify their data architecture overall, I guess, to prepare for AI?
Yeah. I think one of the big learning of this year is the importance of data. This is what OpenAI, ChatGPT, and large language models taught us. And when you look at today, AI, there's a lot of application that already use AI. And there's also a lot of application in CX stacks. And when you look at the way they work, it's based on a model of data ingestion. So every time you deploy an application, you basically ingest data, you train the model, and you perfect it based on your own data. If you take a step back, this has created data silos. And moreover, as we keep on adding application, and there's tons of stats on the explosion of fast application, we end up having to move massive amounts of data. So I think now nobody will challenge the fact that the power of AI hinges on the ability to connect data sets. So what data architecture that can work across application, tear down those silos, should we adopt? And there's some other consideration around the governance, the ownership, privacy, all those considerations as well. Are you going to look at them one application at a time, or are you going to define a global doctrine? So all those considerations are having enterprises kind of define a doctrine and an architecture to be able to enable multiple applications. There's going to be, I don't know how many models, and share data across each of them. That's the big change that I've started.
Now, do you see that? To me, that sounds like more of a long-term issue, because if I imagine, I'm thinking from our own experience, just deploying an LLM into, several relatively simple customer service processes, right? It doesn't matter if you're using, GPT-4 or Claude, because ultimately you're using it. You're not using it, you're not training it on additional data. You're using its language capabilities to, for example, better understand intent, better classify words, deliver much more natural answers and language and experiences. And so for that, you don't actually need a lot of other data. So I'm wondering, I'm kind of wondering how you respond to that, and compared to having this massive new data architecture that you can train your own models on.
So I agree that this data issue is not going to be resolved in 1 year. It's a multi-year. I respectfully disagree. I see banks starting to look at what data I'm going to let vendors use from myself. and you see some chief data officer kind of role morphing into looking at the aspect of what is the data we want people to access, what is the data we want to keep for ourselves because it makes our difference. So some companies are building their own variation of the model. They're not changing the model,
Okay.
but they are doing things only with the data in a way that completely insulate the model and its ability to learn from the data, some of the data they're passing.
So you're rather
So
talking about custom models or custom fine tuning that's done by, it would have to be very large enterprises given the current costs and computing power.
no, I'm not. I'm talking mostly about the data. I think there's going to be proliferation of models. At AWS, where I was 10 days ago, there was the story of Delta that is built a system for self-serve questions using LLMs, and they are using different types of model depending on the questions. What I'm stating is all those application and models, they use the data you input to learn. And some companies are saying, well, we have to put some governance to decide what, for privacy reason, we can expose yes, no. What, for strategic reason, we don't want to expose to anyone because we think this data set is unique. And yes, to your question, it's mostly coming from large enterprises, which happen to be the one having a wealth of data and are looking at it as a way to build a moat.
I think they're realizing that they built themselves on top of a gold mine, which they did not know was there, or maybe they couldn't
Exactly. Yeah,
access.
exactly.
So we've talked about data, we've talked a little bit about cost cutting and automation, but what about what about workforce evolution? What about the employee experience? How do you see AI playing a role there?
So I'd like to frame the evolution on the human employee front under the umbrella of enablement. That is, for me, the big trend, the big imperative, I should say.
Yep.
So traditional contact centers, they're super. I mean, the operations are super regimented. You've got processes, you've got script, and we're finding that those scripts that were supposed initially to first to help the agents and second to keep them on the agenda, they're getting in the way of CX. I know a large bank that is spending over 3 years millions of dollars every year to unscript the agent to make them human again.
Wow. It sounds funny
Yeah.
to even say it that way, to make them human again. But I think there's quite a big lesson there. That's a good quote.
Yeah. So the second thing is, as we have the simple interaction being taken care of by automation and self-service, what's left for the agents, for the humans, are the more complex ones that often are tied to exception. And if you want human employees to deal with those, you cannot ask them to behave like machines. They need to be empowered to resolve these issues. And the third thing is the agent profile is raising. So we've seen that with digital started the movement where we've seen agents being recruited with college degrees. And this is a population that you need to retain and manage differently. So one aspect of enablement is actually to manage people completely differently, empower them, and as well enable them. And this is where we start to see the role of AI. But before I go there, there's another big issue that we need to discuss is cognitive load. There is no sign of reduction in the numbers of applications to navigate. We mentioned the interaction being more complex. So when you put this all together, this is where technology has a strategic role to play, assisting human with knowledge, helping them navigate and take the routine task off their plate. And this is in particular where AI assistant and copilots and as well all the other automation technology come into play.
All right. Now we've gone long. I'm going to ask you for a nice short answer on this one. So with all of this innovation, like with all of these, I mean, AI has probably changed already since we started this conversation. What kind of specific steps or areas of focus would you recommend for people coming into this new year? And we know data architecture is the first one.
Well, I would offer 4 practical steps. Number one, I think it's important to look holistically at what all the things that AI can do. We were discussing summarization. It's just a tiny bit. So I think you want to look at it holistically. Number 2 is map data. Before you define the architecture, you want to map the data. And think like bringing water into a building. You need to build plumbing across the floors, across the rooms, the flats, whatever. You also need to map knowledge. This is very often a leftover consideration in those. And the 4th element is give yourself room for more agile experimentation. I think these are the 4 practical steps I would offer for 2024.
Would it be fair to summarize and say that despite all the exciting stuff, it's actually more important to focus on your foundation before you touch any of it?
Yeah, there's an element of that. But again, I said, go ahead and give yourself room for agile experimentations.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Listen, thanks a lot. It was great having you.
Thanks for having me.
And I'll have you back on a history podcast next time. All right.